Blog Talk Radio.
Hello again. Welcome to a new episode of the Ajay Bruno Show. We have a truly fantastic guest today. I'm joined by George Allen, a former governor and senator from the great Commonwealth of Virginia. Hello, and belated Happy Easter.
Well, I hope everyone listening and you all had a wonderful Easter. We did with our whole family, and of course we have a late spring going on generally in the eastern part of the U.S.
Sure seems like it. Well, let's dig right into it. So you obviously come from an accomplished football family, and being a huge sports fan yourself, what made you want to pursue law and politics rather than stick to the de facto family business?
Great question, AJ. Well, it was actually football that got me interested in politics, in that we moved out to California in 1966 when my father became head coach of the LA Rams, and Ronald Reagan was elected governor that year. And Ronald Reagan would come to the LA Rams practices, and I was a kid, grew up in a football family, and I thought, gosh, look at this, here's a politician at practice, standing shoulder to shoulder by my father, asking him questions about strategies and players and so forth. And I said, gosh, here's a politician who knows what's important, football. And, most politicians, they wanted 50-yard line seats and all that. And so I was in high school then and followed what Ronald Reagan did as governor and liked it. That's what got me interested. And then we moved to Virginia when my father came to the Redskins, and I really wasn't involved in politics. I wasn't in the College Republicans or anything like that. I was majoring in history and going into law school, and had buckarooed on ranches out west in Idaho and Nevada. I thought I might want to get into that, but I realized you need a lot of land, a lot of cattle, and a lot of money, which I didn't have. So Ronald Reagan in 1976 asked me to become the chairman of Young Virginians for Reagan. And we were the rebels. We were against Gerald Ford, who was the president, and we won Virginia. But I remember when Ronald Reagan asked me, I said, well, thank you, Governor, but I know nothing about organized politics. I said, I do go around telling everyone, what a great job you've done as governor and have great ideas for America and our future. And he said, well, just keep doing that. And so that's what got me involved. And then people, a few years later, Reagan supporters asked me to run for office. And so people say, well, so why didn't you get into football like your father? And I said, well, my father never had a losing season, but he'd be getting fired all the time. So I got into something much more predictable and stable, and that's public service and politics. But it's competitive. There's a lot of similarities in it as far as teamwork and hard work and ideas and motivation. You get knocked down, you get back up. You don't brood over mistakes. You learn from them and improve. And so there's a lot of principles in my governance and in public service that I learned from football or rugby or my father and those experiences. But I still love sports, and I think that the meritocracy of sports is what we should emulate in our society, in that, looking back all those years, that players were on my father's teams were the teams I played on. They're from different places, different religions, different races. None of that mattered. All that matters is, on that level playing field, could they help the team win? And that's what we should aspire to in our society, AJ.
Well, I agree. That's a great attitude to have. Well, a lot of that has to do with society, obviously deals with our history, and I know you and I both share a great passion for history. I was wondering, besides for Jefferson and Reagan, are there any other figures you look to the most for inspiration, and what historical errors do you find the most intriguing?
What historical errors are the most intriguing?
For you, yes.
Or eras?
Oh, eras with an E. ERA.
Yeah, not errors, not mistakes.
No. There's been plenty of those too, but no.
Well, that's part of history as well. Well, I think the most interesting part is really the formation of our government when we seceded from the British monarchy, and the brilliance of Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, which I consider to be the spirit of our country, James Madison's brilliance and all the compromises and consensus that was done to create the Constitution with all sorts of checks and balances, all designed to make sure that the government reflected the will of the people, and that there's all the sort of protections, the jealousies and prerogatives of the states versus the federal government, the House and the Senate, the judiciary, the executive branches. All of that was just such a brilliant document for governance, and that's inspirational. George Washington is inspirational in that he could have been made king, but he showed the self-discipline and integrity to say, no, I'm going to serve 2 terms, and that's it. I still think that Thomas Jefferson's definition of the sum of good government, which he stated in his 1801 inaugural address, where he defined the sum of good government as a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, but otherwise leave them free to pursue their own industry and improvement, and that the government should not take from the mouths of labor the bread they have earned. I still consider that the sum of good government today, in that I hate limits and despise restrictions and nanny laws. As long as somebody's not harming someone else, leave them alone. Let them be free. And that's, to me, the foundation of our country's individual freedom, and the corollary of that is personal responsibility, and that everyone, regardless of background, has that equal opportunity to compete and succeed based on their own hard work and ingenuity. Now, through the years, the beginning, obviously, women weren't allowed to vote. African Americans, most were enslaved. You had the Civil War. After the Civil War, there was segregation, and really not. And then women eventually were given the right to vote. And so I see the United States constantly striving to be that more perfect union. And I think that's why Ronald Reagan has such a high spot in most people's estimations, as he took those foundational principles of peace through strength, and Jefferson's belief in individuals and the people, and applied them to the more present day challenges than what we had in the beginning of our country. And so you can learn from history, the mistakes from history, and also the improvements and opportunities for people throughout history, and it's all done and it should be done in a civil way, where one branch, or the people, all people, unless they're harming others, are given more opportunities or equal opportunities in their lives.
Well, I feel like there's definitely been a lot of growth in the way you describe throughout history, but in modern times, there tends to be too much power in the hands of the federal government, and there's a lot of abuse that goes along with that. So you identify as a Jeffersonian conservative. What would you say we're doing wrong, and what is it with that philosophy that is important to you that you would apply to try and fix some of the problems we have now?
Great question, AJ. I think a lot of good things are happening in Washington. I do think getting those tax cuts through and making businesses in the United States more internationally competitive, from having the worst, highest taxes in the world to now better than average, will help. I think what they're doing in regulatory reform is fantastic. It's similar to what I did as governor, where we repealed or amended 71% of the regulations. I think the productive energy policies, where we're number one in the world with our coal and oil and natural gas, that's all great for our economy, jobs, competitiveness, balance of trade, everything. The biggest concern I see out of Washington, beyond the constant, I hate the blackmailing where the federal government says, well, if the states don't do this, you're going to lose highway funds, or you're going to lose such and such funds. But the biggest problem we have, I think, in the federal government is something that actually Thomas Jefferson and Ronald Reagan said that was needed, and that's a balanced budget requirement. 49 states have a balanced budget requirement in their constitution, and the spending, the $2 trillion annual deficits now, the debt is a major, major concern. And Thomas Jefferson said, bind them down with the chains of the Constitution, otherwise they're going to put future generations in perpetual debt. And Ronald Reagan said the only two things he wishes he had accomplished when he was president was a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, as well as line item veto authority for the president. And I think that without a balanced budget requirement, and you're seeing it in both parties, they're just going to be spending us into deeper and deeper debt, which obviously is going to be harmful for future generations. And when interest rates go up, as they are, and getting more towards a normal average, that cost of paying off that debt is going to be eating up all discretionary spending. And I'm one who believes that the paramount responsibility of the federal government is national defense, but you can't have a strong defense without a strong economy. And if we're going to end up with inflation and a devalued dollar to pay off debt and high interest rates, it's going to make it very difficult to have a strong national defense for our country. So more than anything else that needs to get done is a balanced budget amendment of the Constitution. In fact, if the federal government's not going to act, the states, by the Constitution, can call for a convention of the states and for the sole purpose of a balanced budget requirement. Nothing else, no other issues, but a balanced budget. And if we can get just a few more states to agree to that, I think that, one, the convention would be successful. Secondly, I think Congress would actually probably act and say we don't want another convention of the states and pass that. But that's clearly the most important thing that needs to be done. And once there's a balanced budget requirement, then the government, the leaders have to decide what's a priority, and that's what leadership is. Leadership is setting priorities and getting people to agree to those missions. And it's not easy to say no to all these people asking and entities asking for money, but it has to be done. And the only way that they're going to get the backbone to do it is with a balanced budget. And they say, oh, that'll constrain the government. No, it won't constrain the government. It's the way everyone else operates. And if they want to have more money to spend, then you want to have a vibrant economy, a pro-growth economy, rather than this approach, which is putting us into too much, and I think dangerous levels of perpetual debt.
Sure, and at this point, we're now over $20 trillion in debt. I just don't know how you even dig out of a hole that deep. So from your time serving as governor,
well, the way you get out of it is you stop the spending that they're spending on things that are not essential, and you start, obviously, and the other way part of it is saying no to spending, and the other part is a vibrant, strong economy, and then you get more revenues in.
Mm-hmm. Sure, no, I agree. And the amount of military spending, I agree we need a strong military too, but I've read articles about there being hundreds of billions of dollars that Pentagon doesn't even ask for, but they just put it in the budget anyway, and things like this add up. So,
oh yeah, they sure do.
Yep. So, from your time serving as governor, and I think pretty successfully, what lessons do you think should be applied on the federal level that they can learn from in order to run the government as successfully as you did in Virginia?
Well, it's what I was just saying. The states, 49 states, have a balanced budget requirement, and I think that is one key thing that is needed at the federal level, and everyone understands it. This is not some esoteric, convoluted concept. You don't spend more than you take in. People run their homes, their households that way. People run their businesses that way. And it can be done. I also think the line item veto is another powerful tool that I had as governor and used it. And even President Trump just brought it up. And you were bringing, AJ, broach the point that, national defense is a priority, but it doesn't mean you don't scrutinize what the Department of Defense is spending. Are they adopting weapon systems or procurement policies that are leveraging innovation and creative ideas? Are they future-proof? You could waste more money quickly on new technologies that are outdated within a couple of years. So there's plenty of things that all aspects of government can operate more efficiently. The other thing several things I think the federal government ought to do is, in Virginia, in legislation, we have what's called the single object rule. So every piece of legislation has a single object. instead of putting a mishmash and stew of all sorts of stuff, some that's obnoxious and distasteful and others that are good, have every bill have a single purpose. Because right now, you end up voting on bills and, well, I really didn't like that part, but I had to vote for it because it had this in it. So that single object rule is a good idea. Another great idea, which I think is a great idea, members of Congress don't, is I find it just disgusting that they run on these continuing resolutions. They're a full-time legislature. It's not as if they have any other job to do. And the only thing they really must do every year is pass the appropriations bill. Sometimes it's called the budget bill. And it gets to October, and what do? They pass a continuing resolution. Then they pass another one past Thanksgiving. And then right before Christmas or sometime there, some omnibus bill passes. We just had one passing. They're going way past Christmas. They're going close to April Fool's Day now. But my view is that if members of Congress do not get appropriations bills done on time, which is their job and what they're paid to do, you withhold their pay. Withhold their pay until it's finally passed. I brought that up when I was in the Senate and gave a speech on the floor, and one of the spouses of a senator said, "Oh, I heard you speaking today on your taxpayer protection bill and this discipline, this paycheck penalty that I'm talking about." And I said, "Oh, did you like that?" And she said, "No, I didn't like that. Do you realize that that our insurance, our health insurance, is withheld from our paycheck, monthly paycheck, and that goes directly to Blue Cross, Blue Shield, whoever the insurance company is, and that if we don't get a paycheck, how is that going to get paid? You didn't think of that, did you?" I said, "Well, I reckon you'd have to write a check every month then." "Yeah, and then I'd have to remember having to write a check." And she complained. I left driving home that night. I thought, gosh, this is an even better idea. They'll have the spouses yelling at them to get it done so they don't miss paying their health insurance bill. So to me, that is a discipline. It's a common sense idea. And it's the way it works. Anytime I speak to a group on this, I said, ask folks to raise hands who are contractors. And I say, "Hey, if you don't finish off that addition or complete your job, do you get paid?" And they say, "Heck no," or "Hell no," or something like that. And I say, that's the way it ought to be in Washington as well, with those people in Congress.
Sure, that's a great strategy, and I agree. From your time serving first in the House and then the Senate, what is it that you think from observing that's really broken with our legislative process nowadays? It seems like what you're talking about, not a lot gets done. They don't seem to be held accountable for that in any real way that will make them not continue this process. So, what's the underlying issue, and how can that be fixed so we don't have that in the future?
Yeah, thanks for phrasing the question the way you did, AJ, because everything I've just been talking about, a balanced budget amendment, line item veto, paycheck penalty, and the single object rule, all is to have accountability. They're public servants. The owners of the government are the people. And so I think all of those would help bring more accountability. The Senate is made up of men and women who are articulate. They're smart. It's the most collegial batch of people I've ever been with. And I got in trouble for saying this, though. I said it, but it moves at the pace of a wounded sea slug. I'd make more decisions in a morning as governor than you make all week in the Senate, and people don't seem to mind not doing anything. And I do think that if you put in these incentives, like a paycheck penalty and require a balanced budget, and the president's also held accountable for wasteful spending with the line item veto, so the president can't say, "Oh, I had to sign this bill because we need it for defense spending." Well, if you have, I think the more scrutiny on spending, the more accountability, the better. And those are the things that I think any one of those 3 or 4 ideas, I think would get them acting. And I guarantee you, if you withhold their pay, that's going to have an impact. If there's a balanced budget requirement, they'll operate the way that legislatures in the state do. And they're going to have to say, gosh, we just cannot afford all of this. No, we cannot raise taxes to pay for it. And they'll have to actually show leadership and hold and be accountable for their actions rather than just passing off decisions or not making decisions. And I think all of that would matter. And it's also important for the citizenry to be informed. We have the internet now, so people have more access to information, whether it's accurate or not, but still you have access to unlimited information, and I think it's important to hold public servants accountable for their actions or for their inaction.
Mm-hmm. And I wish we could put that into effect as soon as possible. That would be a really great strategy, and it would definitely work. On the issue of spending, I know you also have an interest in science, and you've served on a few science-related committees in the past. One of the things I think we should be spending more money on is NASA. So why does Congress not, say, double their budget, which a lot of experts have suggested would really be a huge help? I mean, it would really be a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things and make a really huge difference.
Well, NASA, the two things, you got space and you have aeronautics, are both part of, or aeronautics or aviation aspects of it. And I'm one who thinks that is important, that scientific research. And I believe in this most recent budget, there is a large increase on it. The one part of NASA that I think is important not to forget is the aeronautics part, the aviation part, because the Europeans, and especially the Europeans, countries are continuing to work in that area. That's part of the future, and I think that's an important aspect of NASA. I think in the space area, generally speaking, what's most practical these days, obviously, is all the satellites and how that's used for communications. As far as the planets are concerned and exploring the solar system or radio astronomy, all of that I think is important to understand our solar system and our universe as best we can. And from that, you do derive some practical beneficial uses here on Earth, and you never know what might come out of some of that science or research. But that's just part of humankind, is trying to learn more about us, about our planet, our systems, and to some extent you got to pay attention to asteroids, for example, that might be coming towards us. I mean that's our existence, and that's something that's not just a U.S. concern. That's for every citizen or person here on Earth. But I think NASA's a good program, but there's also others. DARPA is a good one. To the extent you can privatize a lot of this, I think it also makes a lot of sense. And whether you use Orbital Sciences or whether you use some of the other companies to let the private sector procure or perform some of these services, I think is a good idea, and you may get more bang for your buck that way than making, saying, gosh, let's hire on another 2,000 people at NASA. Well, if there's ways with proper procurement and proper contracts, I think the private sector can be very helpful in a lot of this exploration and innovation.
No, I think they have to be critical in the future. That's definitely important. I want to ask you about Zell Miller, who unfortunately just passed away. I thought he was one of the statesmen who really transcended party lines. Do you have any stories or anything you could share about your time serving with him?
Yeah, I got to know Zell Miller when we both were governors, and we're Southern governors, and there's the Southern Governors Association, and he was the chair of it the year when I got elected, and my last year I was elected chairman of the Southern Governors, and whether they were, the governors were Democrats or independents or Republicans, didn't matter. We had similar views, similar philosophy, and similar challenges. And we'd worked together. It was a great group. Zell was always a great guy. The thing for Zell, for me, and then we were in the Senate together, but he voted, with the conservatives as much as he did with the liberal Democrats. In fact, more so. But Zell wrote a book, I think it was like Core Values was the name of it, about the Marine Corps. And my wife's father is a Marine and had 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. And so she knew I really liked Zell and got along with him well. And she says, well, Zell Miller wrote in his book such and such. So I said, Zell, you're a great example, but gosh darn, I hate my wife constantly trying to control me by saying Zell Miller wrote all that. So as far as I admired Zell a great deal. He was a man of principle. It didn't matter about party. If an idea was a good one, there was a pragmatism. And best of all, I just loved his spirit. He just was a very likable guy. I'd love to listen to him speak. There was a sparkle and an intensity in what he was doing, and of course, I think everyone remembers the convention in New York City when he lashed out after a certain left-wing reporter, which I was like, good for him. It's just Zell. You knew where you stood with Zell. He'd listen to you, then he'd let you know what he thinks, and so he had those Marine Corps values. The upbringing, which was kind of a hard-scrabble upbringing he had in his life, but he's part of the American dream as far as his success and his leadership and his popularity and the love that the people of Georgia rightfully had for Zell Miller. But anybody who knew Zell loved him.
Well, that definitely sounds like what I heard from him. I remember that speech too, and it was one of the all-time great speeches I've heard. So.
Yeah.
Definitely,
well, I think he's the only person who has spoken both at the Democratic and the Republican national conventions. Because he had spoken for the one for I think Bill Clinton, and he obviously spoke at the one for George W. Bush as well. So it actually shows where the Democratic Party went.
That's true. Now there used to be. I would say a lot of patriots on both sides, and it's kind of changed a lot, and that's unfortunate. So you were involved in 3 straight close Senate elections, especially the one in 2006 when it was on a razor's edge, and I thought for sure you'd win that. Can you explain a bit what it's like going through those sorts of experiences and especially dealing with the disappointment of that year in particular?
Well, it was a tough year for Republicans across the whole country. A lot of voters in Virginia, as well as across the country, wanted to send a message against the war in Iraq, which was not going well. I take responsibility for it. The Democrats nominated Jim Webb that year, who was kind of perfect in that he was with his military record and background, was against the war in Iraq. So it wasn't some, left-wing Berkeley hippie who was against the war. He was military, was a guy fellow with a distinguished military record. So that was kind of perfect in that respect. I made mistakes during the campaign that I take responsibility for, and it ended up being very close. It just, some years are good years, some aren't, and it was very close. But you respect the will of the voters, and there were people I know who said, "Oh, God, I like you just fine, but I just got to send a message against President Bush and this war in Iraq." And so and then the day after the election, they switched the Secretary of Defense, and so it was. There's some years that are really good years where you got the winds to your back, and there's some years you have headwinds of sometimes literally hurricanes and storms that are involved in those years, and you do the best you can, try to make fewer mistakes and so forth, and try to motivate people to vote. But sometimes, you get 2010 was a great year for Republicans, and 2012 was not. 2014 was a great year. 2016 was, I think, will go down as a historic year of all sorts of things that were unprecedented. So you just never know. But what I try to do in elections is say, if I'm given the honor and responsibility of serving in whatever the position is, as governor or as a state legislator or U.S. senator, here are the ideas that I want to advance. And then the voters decide. Sometimes, the other side is more motivated than our side, and sometimes our side is more fired up. So you just do the best you can. You put it out there. You get into the arena, and there's never any guaranteed outcomes. And it's strenuous. It's hard. It's difficult, especially for the family as well. And it's one of those things that you go through, and whether you win or lose, you got to feel like at least you're trying to advance ideas or reforms that would improve people's lives. And I'm glad I did it. I have no desire of spending the amount of time you got to spend groveling and begging for money in campaigns. Not that I think the government should fund campaigns, but it's just too much fundraising and not enough meeting people and talking about or advancing good ideas and innovative, creative reforms and legislation or whatever it may be that will make our country more competitive.
Sure. No, I definitely think there's too much money tied into it and not enough about the issues and what can improve the country. So,
yeah.
But you're definitely.
But there's nothing you can do about that. I got asked a question on that, AJ, just last week by folks, and there's too much money. Yeah, there is, but that's also freedom. So it is, people have the right to advance candidates or ideas, causes that they won't. And I wouldn't want to be restricting people's freedom to express themselves politically or otherwise. So, but it does cost a lot of money. And what we got to do, I think, in the future is just do it more smartly. And of course, there's many more platforms. And by the way, it's not the one who spends the most money that wins every election. There's elections I've won, especially in the governor's race. Gosh, we started off 31% behind and raised, I forgot what it was, but it was a whole lot less than my opponent had raised. And so there's elections where I've raised more and won. There's elections I've raised more and lost. There's elections I've raised much less than the other side and won. So money isn't doesn't guarantee the outcome of an election. I think ideas and how they mesh with the sentiments and desires of the voters who are motivated to show up in an election year matters the most.
And rightfully they should. So you're one of the political figures I've most admired for quite a long time, and I was hoping in the future to have a chance to help you win again. Now, are you saying there's no chance you'll consider another run, or is it a possibility that maybe you'll entertain that at some point?
No, I'm enjoying freedom. So I'm still involved in a lot of different ways, and there's ways you can contribute in a lot of ways. I'm chairman of the Manufacturing NAM, National Association of Manufacturers Competitiveness Initiative, which is advocating competitive tax reform, productive energy policies, regulatory efforts, and infrastructure, and a variety of things, workforce development and so forth, which are all the things I've worked on in the past. I'm also, which is great. I thoroughly enjoy doing that. I'm Young America's Foundation's Reagan Ranch Presidential Scholar. They own the Reagan Ranch, and which I think is great to keep presidential homes. That's where you learn about Ronald Reagan, the person, and how he stayed grounded as president by spending 1 out of 8 days as president at that Western White House. Just like you learn about Washington or Jefferson at Mount Vernon or Monticello as the individual. And that also entails talking to young people who are either high school or mostly on college campuses, college age, which is the same age I was when I first got involved. So I enjoy that, and working with a variety of technology and energy businesses as well. So I'm enjoying advocating for ideas and picking and choosing which candidates I want to support. And so, I'll be on my deathbed and I'll be saying, God, they got to change that law. Why don't they reform this? Why do they keep doing things the same old way like a bunch of old pack mules? Come on, show some creative thinking. So I'm still involved, and there's other ways to contribute and try to improve and motivate people for better ideas.
That's great. No, there definitely is. Before we get to a final political question, I wanted to ask about your acting career, which some people might not know about.
My acting career?
I was curious about how you came to appear as a Confederate officer in Gods and Generals, and especially as someone who studied history. What was that like?
Well, we had to sing the Bonnie Blue Flag about 1,000 times from dusk till dawn. The reason I got involved in it, Ron Maxwell, I knew him. He was the director of that movie, and so they wanted. Ted Turner was, I think, paying for the movie, and at any rate, they said, "Oh gosh, it's about Virginia." It was on Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson about Virginia, and they said, "Oh, you can have a bit part in it," and it was such a short bit that I'm glad you noticed. Of course, my opponents in campaigns would make a big issue out of this with it, and at any rate, it was all day long. In between takes, I was actually in debates with Ted Turner over exploring on the north slope of Alaska, the barren north slope, otherwise known as Anwar. And he's like, "Well, if you vote this way against that," he wanted me. I guess there was a vote coming up on it, and so in between, the 100 takes that they had to make of this scene, we would debate, and he finally said, "Look, if you vote against that, I'll give you a speaking part. I'll give you a prominent, something where you actually have a whole sentence that you say in it." I said, "No, that's okay. I'm for it," and so forth. So that whole day was mostly talking about energy policy, debating it with Ted Turner, which was great fun.
Oh, that's the most unique attempt at a bribe I've ever heard about. So.
Yeah, that's right. And all the rest of the actors, because there's a whole slew. There's hundreds of folks just sitting around there during this, and they're just watching us go back and forth. You I think, oh gosh, then have to go through it again. Although my wife says I have no rhythm, but even for the short time I was filmed for that, she could see that I'm not clapping in the proper rhythm to the song. So
no.
That's what my wife noticed about it. As usual, you're off beat.
That's funny. Well, that was still it was a good scene. But so I wanted to ask if you have any advice for anyone running for political office or thinking about it, but they might find the process daunting in terms of money and organization and everything that goes along with that. What would you tell them?
Well, before you run yourself, you ought to. I think it's good to find. And by the way, AJ, there is no recipe for running for office or serving. So everyone's individual, and everyone has their own background and situation or circumstances that might arise. But I think it's helpful that before somebody runs for office, they've actually been involved in some campaign for a candidate or cause that they like. And so then they at least get that sense of it. You can go to all the campaign schools you want, but there's nothing like running yourself. They just can't teach you that. It's like law school. You can learn all the subjects you want in law school, but once you get in the courtroom and see how the practice of law really is, it's not, it's not necessarily the way that you learn these cases in civil procedure courses or criminal law courses or torts or whatever. So so I'd get involved for a candidate. It could be local office, it could be congressional, it could be statewide, but get involved in it so you at least understand the issues. I think the most important thing for anyone who's running is not that they should not be motivated by, gosh, wouldn't it be great to be a senator? Wouldn't it be great to be a governor? Wouldn't it be great to be a representative in the state legislature? You have to be, in my view, you ought to be motivated to change or reform or improve something. It's not just a title, and this is what's missing. It seems in a lot of people's dismay and distrust of government, have the integrity that if you are given that honor of serving the people, to keep your word, keep your promises, Don't make promises in the midst of a campaign unless you intend to keep them. If you don't know where you stand on an issue, tell folks. I have to study it more. I have to look into it. My general philosophy is such and such, so I'm inclined that way, but because you never want to mislead someone. I think being truthful and honest with folks will be appreciated, that if you actually don't know the answer or don't make easy promises if you don't know if you're going to be able to keep them. So I think you have to be, somebody running for office really needs to be motivated and driven to say, I got to get in there to reform the welfare system so we promote the work ethic rather than reward idle behavior, or this criminal justice system is helping out, it's terrible for victims of crime, or it's obviously not justice if you have crime rates increasing, or you want to bring accountability to schools with testing or measurements and so forth. So whatever the motivation is, there was a fella running in Alexandria, which is a very strong Democratic area, and I asked him, Fernando, what do you want to run for city council? It's pretty hopeless running as a Republican here. And I said, what do you want to do? He said, I think we need more balance. We need more Republican views. I said, oh gosh, that's fine. No one cares about that. What would you do if you're on there? He says, well, I think the parking is terrible here. I have my small business, a nanotechnology business, and he says, I just have a hard time finding parking. I said, bring that issue up. That's what people care about. Everyone. That's something that resonates with a lot of folks. Well, he talked about it some. He didn't win the election. He did a little bit better than Republicans normally do, but still, I just want to hear from people, what will you do if you're elected? Not because most people don't care about red versus blue, Republican versus Democrats. What they care about is what are you going, what's going to motivate you? What are you going to actually accomplish or try to accomplish if you're in office? And in most places, the independent voters are the ones who swing it one way or the other, and you can't win with just Republicans or Democrats. Now, there's some places like Utah, Republicans going to win, and places like I don't know, New York City. Well, even New York City ends up with a Republican every now and then. Look at Maryland. Maryland has Larry Hogan, a Republican governor of Maryland, which is a deep blue, Democrat state. So most people don't care, are not politically obsessed, and they care about ideas, and they try to measure the character of a candidate. And as far as a candidate is concerned, that candidate has to have that drive and integrity. And if they don't, they probably won't win anyway and probably shouldn't.
Well, those are some words of wisdom, and I couldn't agree more. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It was a really great conversation, and it was a pleasure.
Well, AJ, it's a pleasure talking with you as well, and I hope to see you on the trail ahead somehow, some way. But most importantly, always stay strong and positive for freedom.
Definitely. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Adios.
Adios. Well, that was George Allen, former governor and senator from Virginia. We had a really, really great exchange there. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to join us in the next episode. We'll have some more good guests. That's a tough act to follow up. Make sure you keep an eye out for that. Join the mailing list as well. tinyurl.com/The Ajay Bruno Show. You'll be getting updates about any new programs we have. I won't give you too many, but just enough so that you have the information you need. Once again, this has been The Ajay Bruno Show. So until next time, I'll see you then. So long.